Greetings everyone, it's Mar, and once again this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title there, it is now time for me to review the next entry in the Star Trek series. It, of course, is Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home. As you can tell, there's my DVD copy of it, and I bought this used on Amazon, and I can definitely tell you, it does play perfectly. So it's one of those buys where it's like new, alright. Definitely. Still haven't watched the special features disc, so hopefully that one plays wonderfully as well, or else looks like I'll have to go to Blu-ray for the special features. Released in 1986, the film was made for about $25 million, made about $100 million, give or take. So even by the kabuki-ish Hollywood accounting, where you gotta make double your production budget to break even, it did make its money. And this film picks up right where 3 left off, with our crew still on Vulcan. Using the captured Klingon bird of prey, they head back to Earth, but when they get home, they discover that something's amiss. While they've been gone, a strange probe has entered the Earth's atmosphere and is causing a bunch of crap to happen. The seas are messing up, all technology is starting to fade in and out. It's like a doomsday scenario, and all because of this probe, and it's making this weird little noise that humans can't comprehend. Well, when the crew of the Enterprise, now the Bounty, mutiny joke, end up back on Earth, they translate it, and it turns out that it's a whale song. And I like this little part of the plot, because it just shows that even in the future, in this idealistic future that Roddenberry helped create, humans, and of course, by proxy, because there's more than just humans in the Federation, their sister and cousin species are so arrogant that they feel that any time there is a message sent to a specific place, it must be meant for us because we're the quote-unquote dominant life form. Nope, could be meant for some other intelligent life on the planet, in this case, humpback whales, which sadly, in the time that the film was sent, are extinct. Which, just hearing that, and even now, it's like, ooh, it's kind of sad, because think about it, by the time it hits the year that this film is supposed to take place in, that could actually be a reality. I mean, there are countries that still whale, as we see here. I don't think it's as bad as it was when this film was made, but it's still there. Humans still pollute, and every year there's animals that go down the list. Well, with no humpback whales, what is Earth to do? Well, they're going to resort to a tried and true method when it comes to solving an issue like this. Time travel! I see this as an absolute win. And how are they going to do it? Same way they've done it before. The sun. They're going to go back to a period in time where Spock has calculated that they will find some whales, and they end up in 1980s San Francisco. 2 and 3 were the more standard sci-fi adventure out in space Star Trek film, whereas this one, even though it does have scenes set in space and involving spaceships, and you definitely could tell that the budget did go towards special effects, it has a more, lack of a better expression, and pardon any puns, down-to-earth feel, and it has a little bit more of a lighthearted tone. It's not fully light, because you still do got that threat caused by the probe and the destruction of future Earth, and of course for a brief scene near the end you got whalers. But because it's set in the past, and our characters are from the future, it does have that fish out of water element there that works beautifully, which leads to this film having a lot more humor than the previous 2 films. I mean, the 2 films did have humor, but it was balanced in a way to where it didn't undermine the drama. Like, you didn't have, I mean, even though I like the series pretty much, it doesn't go the MCU route where every couple minutes is a one-liner, and sometimes the humor undercoats the seriousness of certain scenes. Like, even though I like the film Thor Ragnarok near the end, it's like, yeah, they probably could have cut off some of that humor right there for this part. Make the tone shift a bit more towards the seriousness. With the previous 2 ones, that didn't happen here. Even though there's humor, it doesn't undercut the seriousness of it. It strikes the right balance. A lot of the fish out of water humor, it's just the crew of the Enterprise having to adjust to San Francisco in the 1980s, and even such a simple line as, "What does it mean, exact change?" gets a little chuckle because it's Spock saying it. Of course, there's also that scene everyone talks about where Spock does the Vulcan death pinch to the 80s punk, which apparently is based on an interaction that Leonard Nimoy himself had in public where he was met face to face with an annoying guy and he thought, if only I could do the Vulcan death pinch to him. And he put it in there. And from what I've read, that Punk is played by one of the associate producers or someone that worked on the film. And he even wrote the song that he plays. It's basically an original song that's just put in there just to be a random Punk song number 32, essentially. Of course, with the other characters, their reaction and interaction with the time period is what you expect. Like Bones, when he sees 80s medicine and talks to the 80s doctor, is what you would expect. Like, they're primitive. Of course, Scotty having to talk with the plastic manufacturer in order to get what he needs, causing something that could be a predestination paradox. I mean, he even addresses this. I didn't know he didn't invent the thing. And of course, the most obvious joke you could do, considering the time period, Chekhov being mistaken for a communist spy. That happens when they sneak aboard the 80s Enterprise, which is a warship. And it's like, really? You had to leave Chekhov on the ship? You couldn't have him beam out first, Uthura? You're not going to get mistaken for a communist spy. At least as easily as he would with that thick Russian accent. And of course, earlier in the film, you got the people he's talking to on the street looking for nuclear vessels. Or vessels, excuse me. And them looking at him like, what the frick? And even the cop who we talked to looking at him like, are you serious right now? And joining our Star Trek cast, we got Catherine Hicks of Child's Play 1 fame as Dr. Jillian, who is our cetacean expert. She's first met by Spock and Kirk when they go to the Cetacean Institute looking for the humpback whales. And right from the beginning, you could tell that she knows there's something a little off about them, but she's not quite sure what. And when she finds out the truth, she does take it in stride. It seems more she's humoring Kirk at first, like, oh yeah, you're from the future, yeah, and I got some oceanfront property in Nevada I can sell you. But then as the film goes on, she really sees he's telling the truth. At one point, she's going to him out of desperation because of what happens with the whales. And then when she sees that it's like actually the truth, she takes it pretty well. Some people, that's one thing I can definitely say I can compare it to is some of the scenes from the original show that I've seen. This episode also involves time travel. I forget the name of the episode, but it's the one where they are sent back into the past and they are tracked by the fighter jet and they get the pilot in, and then later they have a random tech sergeant from the base there. Their reactions to the future technology kind of reminds me of that, but she takes it a little bit more in stride than they do, because at least she doesn't try to attack any of them or like seem like he's going into like a panic mode. And of course, she ends up going to the future with them, which from what I understand, she doesn't appear in any of the later films, which is kind of a shame. It would have been nice to see her reunite with Kirk. They did have a nice little chemistry, and they hint at a romance between the two of them, which is like, of course, Kirk getting with another female. That's Kirk for you. Especially so soon after David's passing. Which, of course, they do mention that thing a little bit near the beginning when Kirk briefly talked with Saavik in the last appearance that she has on film. She remains on Vulcan, and she's never mentioned again. They just wrote her out of film just so they wouldn't have to try to hide another Vulcan in the past, or when they could have just left her at Starfleet or something else. But of course, there is kind of a story reason for her remaining on Vulcan, but it's never mentioned in the film, although I think it is in the novelization, and that is that she's supposed to be pregnant with Spock's child from the Pon farr in the previous film. It's like, you couldn't mention something like that just in dialogue. Would have at least made a lot more sense than her just randomly decide to stay on Vulcans. Like, really? No dialogue to explain why? But yeah, it would have been nice to see Jillian in later. Even if it's just like a brief cameo, like background appearance during the trial in Part 6, which that should be an interesting little thing to see once I get to Part 6, considering that is a plot element that carries over from 3 in this film, because in this film, near the beginning, before they arrive on Earth and the probe has started its business, we see that one Klingon clamoring for blood. He wants to essentially, if he could kill Kirk right then and there with his bare hands, he would, if Kirk was even there. Which I'm surprised. I was actually watching the scene closely later on when it does do a court-martial scene. I'm like, I don't see the Vulcan here. Like, you'd think that would be a nice little moment to have just, even for just like a brief reaction shot of him going Leonard Nimoy's direction. Like with Reed does an excellent directing job. From what I read on IMDb, he had a harder time directing this film, which, even without having to be told more, it's like, yeah, that makes sense, considering he's in this film more than he was in the previous film. Most of his scenes were in the third act, and I don't know what order he filmed the scenes for part 3, but if he waited until the end of production to film his scenes, I wouldn't be surprised, because then you can get all the hard part out of the way and be like, alright, here's this one. Now for this one, it doesn't really matter what order he did them in, unless he decided to shoot all the scenes he's not in, and then back-to-back days do the ones he's in, but even then, that's still going to be a nightmare, because not only do you have to, you got to get together with the crew and like, all right, for the first take we're going to do that angle, second take we're going to do that angle, you can get the lighting right, how much daylight we got left, you got all the technical elements, and then you also got to go, the moment you yell action, you got to go from director mode, go in there and be like, I'm a Vulcan, I am a Vulcan, I am a Vulcan, devoid of emotion, suppress emotion, and then speak your dialogue and do your body language with enough gravitas that the audience will believe you. It's a hard thing. If this character was a normal human, then it'd be a bit easier because you wouldn't have to go all the way. But I will say, Nimoy does balance it pretty well, and it does show in the film. It's an excellent film. As a whole, I'd say I like it about the same as the previous one. It is a totally different film, if what I've said about it has not already made that clear. So it's hard for me to say which one I like more than the other. I mean, space adventure, fish out of water comedy, both involving the Star Trek cast. I guess it depends on what you're more in the mood for, and if you're not watching 2 through 4 in quick succession. Like if you want more of a lighthearted comedy, watch this one. If you want something with a little bit more of a space bite, including a fight between the main hero and the main villain, you go with Star Trek 3. If you want something that has a little bit more of a thematic resonance, worthy of a Shakespearean drama, then you'd go with part 2. Leonard Rosenman composed the score, and it is a pretty good score. Outside of the opening theme and possibly the beginning of the credits, I can't think of any pieces that I would want to listen to individually. And again, this is the first time I've ever watched the film as a whole, so maybe watching the film a couple more times, there might be pieces that stick out a bit more. But I'd say tone-wise, it manages to straddle that edge to where it fits both the comedy and fish out of water aspects of the film with the sense of adventure and hope that Star Trek is known for. It has that nice little balance. And it's a sentiment that the Academy shared because they nominated the score for Best Original Score that year. It was one of 4 Oscars it got nominated for. It also got nominated for Best Sound Editing, Best Cinematography, and just Best Sound. I don't know at the time, I don't know what the difference between Best Sound and Best Sound Editing would be. It's like, you would think they would just be one Oscar. I think since then they've actually been merged into one Oscar. It's one of those weird things like, really? There's more than one? That's the Academy for you sometimes. Overcomplicating it, but that's bureaucracy in a nutshell. The special effects for the film are pretty good. I mean, compared to the last 2 films, there's not as many spaceship scenes. I mean, the first act, as where a majority of them are, there are shots throughout the film of the warbird. Most of the time it's cloaked and you're just seeing the inside, so you're seeing the set. The whale special effects are ones to mention, because about 95% of the times we see a whale in a movie, it's a special effect. Usually either a miniature that you can tell it was matted in, or a big prop that they would use sparingly, like the scenes where it's swimming into the bay. That's a big old prop. And they're done in such a manner that they actually got activist people to protest because they thought they were filming with real whales. Save the whales! Don't film them! Save the whales! Which I would just love to have walked past one of these groups looking at them like, that's the beauty of practical effects. You can fool the activists into thinking that you actually used the real thing when you didn't. And it's a testament to the hard work. I bet the people that did the effects are probably smiling when they saw this, like, oh yeah, we convinced them that well. And of course, speaking of the whales, it was nice to have a little scene where Spock actually mind melded with one of the whales. That was a nice little touch. It also makes me wonder what would happen if a Vulcan were to mind meld with other intelligent life forms that are animal life, not like humanoid life. Like, what would it see if he mind melded with a unevolved chimpanzee or gorilla? What if he mind melded with a parrot, like an African gray? Mind meld with even though they're not the same level, mind meld with a dog. Other cetaceans probably the same thing, like we see in the film. It's one of those things that's like, would be interesting. And would it kind of backfire if he mind meld with something that is intelligent but not as intelligent, or the brain works differently? Because here we're seeing Spock mind meld with another mammal. What if he mind melded with something that was of a lower reptile, like mind meld with a snake? Now, there's only one thing I have left to address, and that is the ending, and it's going to be a double thing. Most of the time when I do these reviews, I don't like to really discuss the ending, especially if it's spoiler heavy, but there are exceptions to this rule, and this is one of them. And I believe that's because of the nature of the film and how thematically it is a fitting conclusion to this trilogy. And I will say that if this had been the last time we had seen the original cast in a Star Trek film, it would have been a fitting ending. And that's because of how this film ends. It ends in a way that it leaves the room open for more sequels. And of course, we've got 2 more films with the original cast, and then the opening of Generations. And if this had been their ending salvo, it would have been one where we're all clapping and watching with glee. Now, to start this off, we have the trial. I don't remember if they necessarily mention it's a court-martial, but considering the charges, it sounds like it more or less is. And in the end, because of all the circumstances, only one charge is not dropped, and that is disobeying an order from Starfleet. And that is thrown at Kirk alone, since they all plead guilty. He's basically punished for it, but considering all the circumstances, they decide that his punishment will just be a demotion. So he goes from Admiral back to Captain. And since he's now a Captain again, they're going to put him in the place where he has wanted to be for the last couple films. And as Spock said, is his first best destiny. They will put him in command of a starship. This is not me saying... I wish I had thought of this wording I'm about to say myself, but this is another one of those things that comes from a YouTube comment, but it isn't any less true, and that is, this is one of the few times you will see someone smiling at getting booted down in rank. And it is true with Kirk, as Spock told him before, it was a mistake for you to accept promotion. Because Kirk is one of those Starfleet officers that can't just sit behind a desk and just be like, he can teach, as we've seen a couple times, but he has to be out there in the field. He can't be behind a desk being a bureaucrat, essentially. He is a field officer, not a desk officer. And there's nothing wrong with it, because he has that temperament for it. As we've seen in the original series, as we've seen in the films, and we'll keep seeing after this, he's one you want out in the field. And of course, from what I understand, in Generations, he actually even gives some of that sentiment to Picard. I don't know if Picard actually heeds that advice, but see as I get further into the Star Trek mythos. Oh, and not after the trial, which, as I mentioned before, is like, no Klingon. That would have been a nice little moment to have that there, but I guess I figured that might have taken away from the ending. Well, they are given a new starship, and it's not the Excelsior, and it's not some other random ship. It is a brand new Enterprise, which I think is a nice little note, because in the previous film, weren't they going to retire the Enterprise because it was old? Maybe this is one of those things. You just don't know what you got till it's gone. And so, now that they no longer have the original Enterprise even to use as a museum ship to keep the legacy alive, they're going to christen this ship the Enterprise A, I believe. And now Kirk gets to be the first captain of this brand new ship. And this is where you really get a sense of what the subtitle for this film means. Because it's not just them going to Earth, them saving the Earth through the whales. It's the entire crew, including Spock, returning to the Enterprise with Kirk in the captain's chair and them going out into space on adventures. That's the thematic resonance of that title. And that's why this moment, if this, like I said, if this had been the last moment we had seen of the original crew, would have been a fitting ending, fitting closure for them in a film series. It's an ending that definitely fills you with wonder and satisfaction. And with that in mind, I can see why, from what I've heard, the next film is a disappointment. Of course, the next film in the series, which I don't know if I'll be reviewing it right away or not, is directed by William Shatner, and it's Star Trek V. So that one, I think I might just go back and review the first film since I haven't seen it yet. It's like, just watching this ending and seeing the context of it now, I can see why, even without all the stuff in that film, I could see why the next film would be disappointments for fans.